Good afternoon, and welcome to this episode of the Ad Route Podcast. As we continue our spin through the world of college athletics, I am pleased to be joined by the Director of Athletics of Houghton University, Dr. Matthew Webb. Dr. Webb, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
No problem. When did you know that athletics would be a part of your path in life?
Well, I mean, I grew up playing sports, so like from the minute I can remember, ball was my first word that I ever said as a kid, my parents tell me. Um, so I think from as early on as when I started playing, I knew I loved sports. When I began my career in higher education, I didn't start sort of in higher ed in the athletic arena, although I was dabbling in it as an assistant coach from sort of early on. And I got to a point in my professional career where I was in more in the sort of student life realm, um, in student affairs, but I was also assistant coaching sort of on the side. And I found myself just really looking forward to sort of that 4 o'clock, 4:30 time of the day when I would get to sort of leave the office and head out to the field to be with the team. And I think it was probably when I started recognizing that that's what I was looking forward to most every day, that pursuing athletics full time might be the route that I really wanted to go. I was at a sort of a crossroads of pursuing, furthering in my education and sort of pursuing administratively in the student life sort of arena, but I didn't want to give up coaching. And so at that point, that's sort of when I made the decision to go full out into athletics, and that's then led to now administrative role in athletics. I'm not coaching anymore. But that's sort of how it happened. I completely lost you now. I don't hear you at all.
Do you miss coaching?
Do I miss coaching?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, there's days I miss it. I miss the interaction with the students, that sort of direct interaction with the young people. That's what sort of I think we get into it for, is for that um, connection with the student athletes. That's still why I do the job that I do. It's for the student athletes, but my connecting piece now is much more with my coaches and staff than it is with the students. But I miss it, especially when I look out my window and it's nice. I was a soccer guy, and so I was an outside sport coach. And when I look out my window and the weather's nice and I see the team out there on the field, and I'm sitting here in my office looking at spreadsheets and numbers and budgets or whatever. Yeah, I miss being with the athletes. There's days I miss it, but I also love what I do, um, as well, and I don't miss it as much when it's not nice outside. So
The major recent challenges that colleges are facing is the enrollment cliff. Have you seen it so far in the E8, or is that something that's still far off for many schools?
well, the enrollment cliff I don't think is far off, but I think the sort of residual domino effect of it is probably just we're probably just going to start seeing that in the next couple of years. I mean, we're sort of at the beginning of that cliff period right now, and so um, no, I haven't seen it yet in the Empire 8. I obviously am not as intimately aware of everybody's enrollment and so forth, outside of my own institution, but um, we talk about it at Houghton quite a bit here at our institution. I work directly with our enrollment folks, and we talk a lot about the potential. I don't want to suggest that we are not immune to it. That's certainly not the case, but we are a little bit of a different type of institution. We're a much more of a niche institution, as given that we're a faith-based institution, and so there's just a different dynamic of sort of the pool of students that are interested in us to begin with is probably narrower than maybe a lot of other institutions, and that pool will still always be. And I think we've always attracted well beyond just New York State or just the Northeast. Certainly, that's the majority of our students, as would probably be most of the schools in the Empire 8. That would probably be very similar. Most of our students come from, the Northeast. But um, we have employed some strategies in recent years, sort of in anticipation of this, to target some areas of the country that aren't impacted by the enrollment cliff, kind of like we are in the Northeast. And we'll see.
You look at just the big picture. One of the, or two of the toughest aspects of working as in athletic admin is fundraising and alumni engagement. How do you ensure that these efforts align with the school values and overall mission?
Say the last part of that question again. How do I ensure that what?
Those efforts align with the school's overall mission and their core values.
Yeah. So we have a pretty interesting model here at our institution as well. Again, I work closely with our advancement office, but we've got a position in our advancement office that's specific to athletics. In fact, the person that's in that role that does fundraising for, and I would say then leverages the relationships of athletics for fundraising for the institution, is a former athletic director here at Houghton, was my predecessor. So when he left, he actually moved into that position. And so that has been a role that we have endowed funds for most of our teams. We have endowed funds for the department. So there's quite a bit of fundraising that goes in, a little bit more of probably like a D1 model. A lot of D1 schools have a full-time fundraiser just for athletics. Um, this person's not just for athletics, but there's a dedication to athletics and a focus on athletics. And so um, there's a real close connection there with our department and advancement for that, and that's been a real healthy thing to sort of supplement, our budgets and allow us to do some things that we might not otherwise be able to do on our just normal institutional operating budget. The connection with alumni and giving, most of the giving that happens for athletics, certainly there's giving that's just sort of maybe regular, and I just want to give to, the ping pong program or whatever it might be. But a lot of the giving that happens to athletics comes in the form of projects that we're working on. And so we'll identify particular projects, whether it be a capital project. We just resurfaced our outdoor track, for example. That was one project that we just did that was fully fundraised from mostly alumni, not all, but mostly. Um, so there's affinity to, what are priorities for us as an institution in terms of what people are giving to. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but one thing nice about my job, I'm not specifically responsible for doing all the fundraising for athletics. I like that about my job. Um, we've got another person that has that as a focus of their job, so it's really nice.
One of the things that I'm sure as a former head coach you've had to conduct was difficult conversations. How does that background in coaching, especially around those conversations, help you as an athletic director?
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I am currently mentoring a couple of our student athletes who have aspirations of moving into athletic administration. And I'm really, really encouraging them to get their foot in the door in the coaching realm first. Not that you can't be an AD without having been a coach. There's certainly people out there that have done that. But I think when you get into the nitty gritty of, in the nature of sport, there's conflicts between coaches and athletes, whether it's about playing time, whether it's about, discipline issues or behavior or just a whole plethora of things. Um, I regularly am thankful for my days as a coach in that uh, I'm not suggesting I do things perfectly. I certainly don't. I have my weaknesses, but when I can put my coach's hat on and identify with my coaches who sort of are coming to me with challenges, whatever that they're working on, I just think that perspective of having coached for over 20 years just helps me understand my coaches usually pretty well. One discussion, as you can imagine, coaches come to me quite a bit with, I need more, whatever, and it's usually requires money. And I usually almost always go right to, do you need it or do you want this? There's a difference between need and want. And that's usually a pretty healthy conversation. And I typically get it. I get it from where they're coming from. I can't always say yes. I don't have unlimited resources. But I think the perspective that I've had having been a coach helps a lot. And I think that's a great path to future aspiring athletic directors, that understanding the mind of a coach is really, really important.
You measure the success of the athletic department that goes beyond wins and losses.
Well, certainly wins and losses needs to be part of it. I mean, we talk about that all the time, that we're an athletic department. the nature of athletics is to compete. And if we're not trying to win, it's sort of like, why are we doing it? But there's way more to being successful than just wins and losses. So we talk a lot about our academic performance for students. We're a Division III institution where, the vast majority, almost all of our student athletes, they're not going to be making a career out of playing their sport. And so, I mean, that's actually the case for most kids at most levels. The highest levels are really the only ones. And so, we talk a lot about the importance of succeeding in the classroom. We want to be good citizens in our community. So we do a lot of community outreach, a lot of service within our local community. We're in a pretty rural area in Allegheny County. Allegheny County is often ranked the poorest county in all of New York State. I don't know if it is right now, but it's definitely down there as one of the poorest counties in New York State. And so there's opportunities to make an impact in our community by way of service. I mean, a real specific example, our baseball team has had a pretty long-standing relationship with a single elderly woman that lives in pretty significant poverty, and they go out and chop wood for her every year to prepare for the winter. Like, she heats her home with wood, and so like we do stuff like that quite a bit, and that's a big part of how I would define sort of the success of our athletic department would just be the impact we're able to make in our community. Um, uh, how we do academically. We had one of the highest academic sort of GPAs in the Empire 8 this past year on the president's list by percentage anyway. And so those are just a couple ways that are outside of the winning and losing piece that we really emphasize as important.
You're not in the office. How do you get away from the job?
How do I get away from the job?
Yes.
It's not easy because when I get away from my job, my home is about a 3-minute walk from my job. So it's it's hard to actually get away. Um, but I do. I love to travel. I love to read. I take advantage of the breaks during the year. And I'll mix vacation with work at times too. For example, our softball team, we were on spring break last week. Our softball team was in Florida. I went down to be with the softball team for the first part of the week, and my wife came with me. And she enjoyed just, you know, we could be at the hotel and in the pool, and then we hit the softball games and supported the team and took them out to dinner and those sorts of things. But um, so I try and mix those when I can. So that my family gets to be part of it. In fact, when I was a coach, one of the things that I felt was really, really important to model to my athletes, I wanted them to see me in the role as a husband and as a father also, because actually those are more important roles than what I was to them as their coach. That's an important relationship, the coach-player relationship, but I wanted them to understand that actually a bigger priority for me is my relationship with my wife and my relationship with my kids. So, we had players to our home quite a bit. I wanted them to see me in those roles, but I like to read, I like to travel, and when we have opportunities to do that, I do that. So, I actually get exercise in, and when I walk, I have my book with me and I read. So, um, my peripheral vision keeps me on the lines on the track, and I don't run into people. So.
He is the athletic director of Houghton University, Dr. Matthew Webb. Dr. Webb, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the AdDrop podcast.
You're welcome. My pleasure.